Voters in Switzerland narrowly back a proposal to limit immigration from the EU. And European nations have responded with a threat to review their relations with Switzerland. What does this mean politically and economically? Is Switzerland isolating itself? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Shihab Rattansi. It's a fundamental issue for some European voters, immigration, and the strain it supposedly puts on European economies. Now, Switzerland has narrowly backed a referendum that will limit the number of migrants from the EU who can move to the country. The new law could have major implications. Immigration has supported strong economic growth in Switzerland. The law has provoked an angry reaction from the Swiss business community, and it brings into question Switzerland's relationship with the European Union, its biggest trading partner. France's foreign minister has described the referendum result as worrying, and the president of the European Parliament says the EU will have to look closely at the impact the new law will have on its relationship with Switzerland.
In the agreements between us and Switzerland, free movement of EU citizens is guaranteed. Even now, in the follow-up of this referendum, Switzerland has to modify the laws and to limit free movement also for EU citizens. Then we have to react and to discuss and perhaps to renegotiate the agreement with Switzerland.
Switzerland does have a large migrant population. Around a fifth of its 8 million people are from abroad, mostly Germany, but also Italy and France. Of the migrants who came from the EU between 2010 and 2012, 69% were highly skilled, and they make a major contribution to the Swiss economy. Around 45% of the employees in its chemical, biotech and pharmaceutical industries are migrants. Though Switzerland isn't a member of the EU, it is a member of the passport-free Schengen zone, which allows free movement and working rights. Some say that's being undermined by this curb on immigration. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by three guests. From Brussels, Petros Fassoulas, chairman of the European Movement and Commentator on EU Affairs. From London, Dominik Hangartner, associate professor in the Department of Methodology at the London School of Economics. And joining us on the line from Flasch, near Zurich, is Ulrich Schuler, an MP for the Swiss People's Party. Thank you all for joining us. Ulrich Schuler, let's begin with you. Let's spend a bit of time with you, actually, so we can fully understand your party's position. What exactly are you so fearful of?
We have a form of immigration in Switzerland which we wanted to be debated by the population and to be voted about by the population. And people voted yesterday, and they voted no to the ongoing system. So they voted that this system has to change. You see, when it was installed, this system, Swiss population was told that we will have an immigration of about 8,000 people from the European Union into Switzerland. Now it is working since 2007, and we have 80,000 or 90,000. That means 10 times or 11 times more than predicted. And that shows that it does not work how it should. And now the people decided that we have to renegotiate the system with the European Union. It is a democratic decision made by the Swiss people, the highest authority in our direct democracy.
So, and what about the argument, though, that it's precisely because of those high levels of immigration that the Swiss economy is doing so well?
Of course, Swiss economy does well because we are not member of the European Union. But this very, very high immigration we have now creates a lot of new problems. You see, for instance, we deplore the situation in northern Italy, the crisis they have there. But it is not possible that 10,000 and 10,000 of Italians come to Switzerland want to work in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland to every salary which is offered, which is much deeper than the salaries of the Swiss population, because the costs of living in northern Italy are much deeper than in Switzerland. It is very normal that the people in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, they decided by 70% against that system. And I think in a democracy, one has to accept that the people can say that something does not work. And that happened yesterday.
And can you quantify that direct correlation, though, between immigration and economic problems, given, though, that with the current rates of immigration, the economy is doing very well, and you have an incredibly low unemployment rate?
Yes, that we have. It is changing, and it is changing quite fast. You see, between 40 and 50% of the immigrants, they do not come to work. They are family followers, or they want to profit from our social system, our very high social systems, and that there is, I would say, there is no country in Europe which can afford for a longer time such a development.
What about the warnings, though, that this could lead to an end of access to the single market and potentially disaster for the Swiss economy? Was that not important to you?
It's certainly not. You see, it's a question of democracy. And we have a democratic decision that this system, how it is now, does not work how it should. And if you have to realize that, I think in a democracy, you have to debate about that. You have to renegotiate when something does not work like it should. That is the normal way in a democracy. And I think not only in Switzerland is this idea that this system, how it is installed now, is not a very good system. It should be better to review it and to correct it where it must be corrected. And we trust that also the European Union, which has also a tradition of democracy, accepts that now it's time to discuss about that.
And just before I bring in the rest of the panel, I mean, that is an interesting point. How much of this was in some ways a slap in the face at the bureaucrats in the EU, the economic elites of Switzerland, as much as it was a vote against immigrants themselves?
It was certainly a decision against some officials of the business community. You see, if you ask the entrepreneurs, all the thousands and thousands of small entrepreneurs we have in Switzerland, they had a large understanding for these fears of the population of Switzerland. Some officials in the trade unions, officials in the business community, in the business organization, and politicians, they couldn't see the problem at the right time, but now I think they have to learn what happened.
And then just very quickly, I mean, is there a limit, a quota that you will be satisfied? How would those quotas be organized? Would it be by race, by religion, by nationality, or simply by being European or not European? Are there any details about what you want yet?
The initiative, which was on which was the decision, is not. It is free about that. But
okay.
I have the idea that the problem are these people who want to come to Switzerland and not to come to work here. The most important, you see, all these people who are prepared to work, to live in a system of self-responsibility, they are welcome. We have no problem with these people, but
right.
We have problems with these people who do not come to work, who want to profit from some advantages they hope to use here. These people create the problems. And
all right.
I think there we have to change the free movement.
All right, let's bring in the rest of the panel then. Petros Fassoulas, I mean, on the face of it, the EU is in a rather difficult position here, given that many of the mainstream EU parties themselves are advocating pretty much the same thing.
I wouldn't go that far. I think the message coming from the Swiss People's Party is a populist one based usually on half-truths And unfortunately, democracy gets compromised when the facts and the figures are not presented fairly. It's remarkably disingenuous to focus on the alleged violators of the free movement of people, when in fact free movement of people across the European Union and in Switzerland as well generates massive economic benefits. EU citizens moving across borders contribute by the tune of 25 billion euros into the fiscal purse of the EU nations. And that's something that pays for hotels, for hospitals, for schools. Excuse me?
What about Switzerland, though? What about the arguments? Actually, perhaps I'll bring in Dr. Hangartner there. What about the actual specific arguments Ulrich Schuler there was making about sponging immigrants in Switzerland, for example, a very familiar complaint that we often hear?
The thing is that I do agree partially with Ulrich Schuler that immigration has not just benefits, it also has negative consequences for some workers. But overall, the benefits from migration are huge. They are especially huge for big businesses. And I do think what the Swiss People's Party and Ulrich Schuler were successfully exploiting, not just over the last couple of weeks, but over the last couple of years, is the fact that those benefits from migration were distributed very unevenly over the Swiss society.
Right, so it's the usual story, though, of the economic elites making a lot of money from globalization, mass movement, the freedom of capital, but not distributing the wealth downwards.
Exactly right, exactly right. And you have to combine with that the fact that a lot of Swiss people not just have economic fears in terms of that they might be losing their job, although, as you rightfully said, the unemployment rate is the lowest in all of Europe still, that there is some pressure on the housing market, which is obviously not just due to immigration. But in addition to those economic concerns, there are cultural concerns, and those are much more difficult to address. And those are very successfully amplified and exploited by the Swiss People's Party.
Ulrich Schuler, I mean, isn't that the point then? You're going after the wrong target. It's not immigrants that are the problem. It's capitalism that's the problem, especially late capitalism, late corporate capitalism in the 21st century. The money doesn't get distributed. It goes to the 1%, not the 99%.
First of all, it was not a decision by the Swiss People's Party. It was.
I know, but can you respond to the argument there?
By the Swiss people. I think that is important.
Absolutely. But the point is that the argument is it's been being misrepresented as an argument, and actually the focus is very conveniently being moved away from the economic elites of Switzerland to the most vulnerable of Switzerland.
Oh, you see, Swiss economy is a successful economy, and I think it is successful because we can, by our decision, fix the circumstances in which economy happens in Switzerland. That is very, very important for Switzerland. We have a very high, sophisticated economy. We have no economy which is orientated to mass products. So we need people from all over the world, and they are welcome here from all over the world, who can benefit from our system and who contribute to this system.
Mr. Schuler, I mean, to what extent, though, does this idea of a Swiss identity come into this? And I mean, clearly, you know, for years, I mean, there is quite a strong German and Italian and French identity in Switzerland already, though, in some ways. I mean, is it because of the changing nature of the identity of some of those in Eastern Europe, perhaps, that we're worried about? I mean, these are some of the unspoken basis of all this?
We have more than 20% foreigners,
right.
And we have no real problems with these foreigners.
Right.
I think the integration of these foreigners works quite well, but it is the people who
right.
decides about the system. I think there is no other country, perhaps Luxembourg, but no other country in Europe which such a high degree of foreigners in the country with such few problems with them. That is because we decide in the communities, in the cantons, in our federalistic system we have in Switzerland about integration, and it works. But now, you see 80,000 people a year. That is more than can be accepted, and that was the reason that we had this rotation.
Right.
Everything comes to an end.
Petros Fassoulas, perhaps you can give us some context to this debate there. How central is the principle of the free movement of people to the European project, and thus also central to the EU's relationship with Switzerland itself?
It's crucial. It's at the heart of the process of European integration. That idea of inclusivity, of freedom, of the ability to cross borders, interact economically, politically, and socially with other nations and other cultures. The idea that we bring down barriers rather than erect them, the way that the Swedish People Party is talking. And I'm really concerned about the rhetoric used here. The project of European integration, which Switzerland has been participating through bilateral agreements, is one based on reconciliation and understanding, rather than victimizing and putting people in corners and calling them foreigners and accusing them for being a burden on society, when in effect, as it has been admitted, they contribute significantly economically and socially to the well-being of a nation.
Right, but
so
what can,
the
what
heart
can the
of
EU,
Europe is that understand.
What can the EU do now? I mean, they're talking about economic consequences. Is Switzerland's access to the single market really in jeopardy, even as EU leaders themselves are endorsing quotas? Does that really sound realistic?
I think it is. It's hand in glove. The idea of free movement of goods, capital, and people are interconnected. And Switzerland signed a deal that involved all three, and I think the European Union will be forced to reconsider that bilateral deal with Switzerland. And unfortunately, considering that the EU is the biggest trading partner of Switzerland, we will see the consequences of that decision coming to fore, perhaps not tomorrow or the day after, but very, very, very soon.
But Dr. Hangartner, again, there is this point of the potential for hypocrisy, though. Very conveniently, many of the mainstream right-wing parties in Europe are also blaming immigrants for a lot of the problems that have come, perhaps potentially from their mainstream austere economic policies. Can they really go to Switzerland and say, well, look, we're going to cut you off because you're having quotas, even as they themselves, even as David Cameron, say, of the UK, says, yeah, actually, you know, quotas might not be a bad idea, actually?
Well, that's a good question. And we'll see the answer to that in a couple of weeks, I guess. It's difficult to predict what's going to happen, and the reason why it's difficult is because the referendum that was voted on yesterday did not specify any specific quotas, nor how they will be implemented, right? And both the political and economic consequences largely will depend on the specific quotas. If they are set at a very low level, that will have quite dramatic consequences. If they are set at fairly high levels, say like at the actual current rate of net immigration of 80,000, well, the consequences will be minimal, but here, I think I do agree once with Ulrich Schuler that would go against the spirit of the initiative. So it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen next because we don't really know what Swiss people have been voting on yesterday.
Right, and I suppose it would fall into the lap of those who say the EU is fundamentally undemocratic, I suppose, if this is all watered down. But certainly it is 3 months till the European elections, and right-wing Eurosceptic and anti-immigration parties are welcoming this vote and seeing it as boosting their position. France's National Front, which is tipped to come first in European parliamentary elections in May, congratulated the Swiss on their vote. So has Britain's Nigel Farage of the UK Independence Party. Though it is worth noting, once again, that British Prime Minister David Cameron has also talked about capping immigration. In Scandinavia, anti-immigration parties increasingly hold the balance of power. The far-right Swedish Democrats are the country's third largest party. And the trend is growing in a number of other countries, including Austria, where the Freedom Party won over 20% of the vote in September. Petros Fassoulas, so that's once again, you talk about it being an anathema to some of the central tenets of the European project, but as we can see, both mainstream and fringe parties are increasingly seizing on this issue of the freedom of movement of people as what they think is an election winner. So it does seem to be falling apart somewhat. Unfortunately, in a time of economic crisis, people feel insecure and they become easy victims to populist rhetoric. At the same time, as you correctly suggested, mainstream parties have been unable to communicate the benefits of immigration, to communicate the advantages from free movement of people. And as you probably know, when people are thirsty for information, they go to the well and they find it dry, they will consume mud.
And unfortunately, all those anti-immigration, far-right movements and parties you mentioned have been polluting the debate, the political debate, with rhetoric that preys on people's insecurities. I think it's a responsibility of EU leaders, both at the national and European level, to communicate with confidence and conviction what are the true benefits of European integration and how free movement of people and immigration actually makes a difference locally as well as nationally.
But it
for all
doesn't
the
seem like
European
that,
nations.
Petros. It seems like actually mainstream European leaders are also using this because it's precisely their economic policies and their way of doing business which seems so undemocratic, unresponsive, unable to put the interest of its people first before that of bankers and oligarchs and the financial markets, and is committed to this austere economic policy. They don't want to blame that, so they're also going to blame the immigrants as well. That's not really going to help, is it?
Indeed, and unfortunately, as you said, mainstream political elites have been unable to address the economic problems that emerged from the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and they tend to repeat the rhetoric that is used by far-right parties. And as history has shown us, the people will always go for the original. If you placate right-wing rhetoric in an effort to accommodate some of the ideas that emanate from that side of the political spectrum, you end up increasing their appeal. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's the political responsibility of mainstream political elites is to stand up to this kind of rhetoric. First of all, mend the economy, and secondly, communicate the benefits of European integration and the free movement of people that lies at the heart of that project.
Right, but Dr. Hangartner, isn't the problem there, though, is the economic policy that's completely stuck against any kind of expansionary policy? It's so limited in that sense. That's not going to change, so therefore the hostility towards immigrants is probably just going to grow.
Yes, so I think there are two different categories of concerns that we have to distinguish. Let me talk briefly about the economic concerns first, because there it's exactly the problem of what you just said. I think most economists and political scientists do agree on that there are large benefits of immigration. The problem, as I mentioned before, is those benefits are distributed very unevenly. That has to change. Switzerland had a more or less successful system for a couple of years that meant that with the Free Movement of Person Treaty, there were accompanying measures that try to mitigate and reduce that this had on people's wages. So I think it's important to have that economic debate. But in addition to that, that's what our survey research in Switzerland shows, is that people also have cultural concerns, that they again feel like that Switzerland is changing, that Switzerland might be losing its identity. And it's very difficult, obviously, to talk about these concerns and to address these concerns. But nevertheless, I think this will be important, not just for Switzerland, but also for all the other European countries. Because what is clear from the Swiss referendum yesterday is that the usual coalition that supports pro-immigration, namely big businesses and left-wing parties, are not able to convince a majority of voters anymore. And so those interest groups and parties will have to think about how to better communicate the benefits of migration, both economically but also culturally.
Very quickly, Petros Fassoulas, I mean, there is this question as to whether the EU is to blame for its own potential demise because it is so wedded to one economic policy, that the argument will no longer be what type of EU there should be, but whether there should be an EU at all. Where do you think this is going?
I wouldn't go that far at all, and let's remain a little bit within the realm of probability. The EU is a very successful project. The European economy is the biggest one in the world. There are remarkably successful economies within the European Union, and we have a consensus on economic policy. We are emerging slowly from the worst financial and economic crisis since the 1930s, and that is indeed having an effect on people's daily lives. But I don't think we are running the risk of seeing the dissolution of the European Union. But we took certain things for granted. The European Union leaders took certain things for granted during the good days, and they stopped they stop exchanging information and having a discussion with their own electorate about what it means to be part of the European Union. And I think that's the responsibility of political elites at the moment.
Petros Fassoulas, thank you very much. Dominik Hangartner, thank you as well. My thanks also to Ulrich Schuler. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Do send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Shihab Rattansi. Thanks for watching.